Hey, we did it. You're at a weird angle, buddy.
I know. I'm in one of those sound meeting booths found
Uh,
in most California style modern corporate offices for the millennials.
it has for a booth that's like, I get that it's probably like blocking sound from the outside, but it creates a real weird effect on the inside. I've noticed with a lot of those things. It's like a strange reverb that's too tight.
Um, yeah, I can hear myself, but hopefully
Mhm.
these AirPods are going to do the cancellation that that they're supposed to do.
Yeah,
We'll see.
I think you're good. But this week it's great. We don't have any technical issues so far, and we remembered to hit go live as we
Yeah,
started.
the
Uh,
laptop is working, the brain is working.
yeah, everything's going great. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing quite well. There's lots of really cool stuff going on over here in Tampa. It's the summer of fun and summer of hacking, and we like OWASP as a local community that we're having an event today, and a number of other great things coming up, all leading up to everybody's favorite Hacker Summer Camp, which is a big topic of discussion for most people. How about yourself?
All of those things sound great and fun and are in Florida, which is not Seattle. So I won't be able to attend. Things are going great. We've had some beautiful weather. I've started the annual purge of cleaning cleaning all of the
Okay.
stuff that's just like collected in the backyard while it was too cold and damp to like want to go work on them. So things are going pretty good. Oh, and I've been playing an ungodly amount of the new Zelda game
Oh,
because
nice.
finally got my home theater set up dialed in, and so I was waiting for that, and now I can play Tears of the Kingdom.
Uh,
But
for
thank you so
for
much.
jealous viewers, it looks really good. I've seen it.
All of those things are not germane to the topic at hand, though, which is cybersecurity stuff, cybersecurity news. Welcome to GPS Live for the week of June 2nd, covering stories that have happened over the past 7 days or so. I'm Tristan, and I'm joined by
Jonathan Singer.
and we are going to go through some news and stuff that we have found that we found interesting. But before we do that, first, thank you to anyone who's watching live. We appreciate you. Go ahead and leave a comment. We see those come in live. We can interact with you guys. If you're watching on demand, thank you so much. We still see those comments, just obviously after the fact. But before we do anything and say anything important, it is really important to note that the views and opinions that we express are our own and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of GuidePoint Security, just in case we say anything really dumb, because we're just a couple guys, just a couple dudes doing cybersecurity stuff.
We're guaranteed to say something dumb though. And our first comment is already in, Allison. Hi, happy Friday to you too.
Happy Friday indeed, Allison. It is a beautiful Friday. But we've got some interesting stories lined up for you guys this week. We grabbed some stuff. I was talking to Jonathan before the show. I felt like it was a weird week in cybersecurity news because I feel like I just saw the same 6 stories over and over and over again on every site. Like my RSS feed was just the same images and stories repeated. But Jonathan, I think you had a little bit different experience. You had some stuff that came in, and you found this first one for us. So you want to kick it off?
Sure thing. And I'm totally gonna pretend here that we actually have like pre-production notes and a schedule of events that we don't just do this every week because we're just good at it for some reason. But
Yeah.
yeah, let's kick off our first story. You want to throw the banner up?
Yeah.
What we're looking what we're looking at here, coming to us from Tom's Hardware, is a firmware. We'll call it backdoor, but we'll get into that in a second. That's discovered in a large number of Gigabyte motherboards. I'm talking over 250 different motherboards. And as a fledgling gamer myself back in the day, I absolutely was a fan of Gigabyte motherboards, graphics cards, all kinds of stuff like that. But what's going on today is that part of some of their newer motherboards, all of you other fanboys out there running the latest Ryzen 7000 series with their X670 Northbridges, are vulnerable to a small little updater program that actually isn't part of the motherboard's firmware. And like, what I'm saying is, there's a program that runs every single time you reboot the computer to check if the firmware needs to be updated. But
Mm-hmm.
it's checking things that can be intercepted, right?
Yeah. So basically, what this is just like the updater firmware and package. I hope my video is not lagging too much. My computer seems to be having a hard time displaying it. But it's just the updater package that a lot of software comes with and a lot of hardware comes with, right? This kind of thing is built into, I mean, hundreds, if not thousands, of applications and pieces of hardware.
Oh yeah.
And what it does, though, is when this boots up, it pulls a couple of hard coded links to see if there are any updates, and you can also set it to check a network attached storage device. So you can have those updates pre-downloaded to the NAS, and then they'll come to your computer from there. But what the researchers found as they were looking at this was that it wasn't doing any certificate checks as it did these polls. So it made it very vulnerable to a man in the middle, or as the article called it, machine in the middle attacks to basically intercept that traffic and then deliver a package that would be I mean, I guess it would just be the unverified, because they didn't do certificate checks as they were checking for those updates.
Yeah, so these hard-coded URLs, right? Something like a DNS trick where you can point it to a different IP address, or in fact, one of the three URLs that's called out is actually over HTTP, so it's not even encrypted. The fact that that information can be manipulated in transit, and then like you mentioned, when it comes to the other connections that are at least TLS based, there's no validation that the TLS host that it's connecting to is the correct one. And so by the motherboard having a embedded program as part of your operating system do a call out to the internet to a destination that can be potentially hijacked and manipulated in transit and or through resolution, definitely leads the fact that the motherboard is kind of asking for it. Now, we're not saying that this is going to be a forever problem, because there is luckily a patch available that was
Ironically delivered as a firmware update.
So, okay, so maybe they're not helping the case a little bit more. But you hit on a really important point here, right? And the fact that this is something that occurs in a lot of different systems, right? Almost every application that we're running today on a modern operating system, be that Windows, Linux, or Mac, it has some kind of update feature built in. I feel like it's just very standard these days. But the challenge becomes is, do you have your application simply just call out to a website that you own, or do you actually find a way to validate that the whoever it's calling out to and the data that is retrieved is signed appropriately, is authorized by the developing organization, and ensure that it is the real deal. Now, there's always going to be a supply chain concern, right? Where the firmware and updates may exist. We saw like the .zip TLDs from last week, but it still should be somewhat reasonable to expect that the applications and tools, and especially hardware level things, are taking their due diligence.
Yeah. So if you are running a machine or machines that are utilizing Gigabyte motherboards right now, there's over 250. I think it's 271 is the specific number. Motherboard models that were affected by this. So if you're running one of those motherboards, then definitely go check to see if this firmware patch is available. They do recommend, the researchers did recommend disabling App Center download and install. That's the application that comes with Gigabyte motherboards to do this. And if you have done that, then you would obviously have to go and find the firmware update yourself and apply it yourself manually, which I would probably say is if you're actually worried about getting hit by a man in the middle or machine in the middle attack while doing this, then that's the only way that you would be able to go about actually safely deploying this update that they have, again, released already. So that's always a great little button, I think, on these stories, when it's like a huge vulnerability has been found, and by the time we're talking about it, it's already taken care of. We love to see that.
It is. No, I can definitely appreciate that, and still, it does lead to kind of think about some of those challenges too. It's not just update your tools. It's going to pretty much be all the different things that are transacting. We still are seeing these types of either like, like I said, DNS spoofing or if it's unencrypted traffic. For some reason, this we're still dealing with HTTP requests. Why not
Yeah.
slap a certificate on it? But in the meantime, while it still exists, while we still have these challenges, yeah, being able to intercept that stuff, being able to manipulate those things, it is a vast, right? Well, this just reminds us of the story we ran a couple weeks ago too,
Yeah.
where the from a supply chain perspective, the UEFI,
Yeah.
keys were compromised and stolen, and now hardware is essentially can't be revoked. And that, I don't know, right? Is it me, or does it seem like if you can get in at the hardware level, right, you can ensure that the wiping of an operating system or whatever it may be
Yeah.
still pushes that malicious application or driver or whatever file that it needs to from the hardware into the software. um, it seems pretty good target.
It seems like a pretty good target, and it seems like having done this show for coming up on a year, I think you and I are
do
getting
we need to
close.
do you have balloons and cake?
Yeah, I think we're probably going to have to do that at some point. Absolutely. But we're coming close to that, and having done this for so long, what I'm starting to realize is that you ever get the feeling like with major movie releases, like you'll see a major movie come out, and then you're like, wait, for the next 6 months, I just kind of see that movie and variations of it over and over again. You're like, oh, Hollywood's in there, like weird cowboys and aliens phase right now, and then they're going to move on to the next thing. It feels like news comes in waves like that. Like this, it'll be like the MSI UEFI key leaks. Gigabyte has a giant motherboard firmware issue. Like the next one's probably coming, and probably after like 3 or 4 stories like that, we're going to move on to the next big thing in cybersecurity. We'll see a
I'll,
new
I'll
trend.
put a bet on probably something iPhone related. Let's hope iPhone.
Yeah, I would say that's a safe bet given some of the stories we were talking about covering this week.
Well, you want to take us in a whole different direction then?
Yeah, let's move to our next story, which is a new antivirus killer called Terminator is being hawked on some Russian-speaking hacking forums. It is being promoted by a threat actor known as Spyboy, and it claims to be kind of this like all-in-one Swiss Army knife AV, XDR, EDR killer that is capable of killing over 20, or I think 24, bypassing 24 different versions of
Yeah.
AV, EDR, and XDR, which is a significant portion of that top level market, I would say. There are hundreds of those tools out there, but obviously something like this is going to target the most popular ones, and so to be able to kill 24 of them or bypass 24 of them is no insignificant feat.
Yeah, well, without disappointing anybody or calling out any names,
Exactly.
that 24 does also encompass Microsoft's own Defender,
Yep.
and the rest of these other retail names that you may have heard of, and it's coming in at not that steep of a price. The Spyboy baddie is asking for only 300 US for a single bypass, or a steep 3,000 for an all-in-one bypass.
Which is
And
an incredible discount when you consider that most things are usually sold like 2 for 1 or something like that. So he's asking 300 for a single bypass, and then for all 24, it's just $3,000.
yeah,
Like just
24
10
for a
times
price
the
of 10.
base.
It's quite impressive, and the threat actor continues to go on and say, like, look, none of these brands should be considered to be sold alone, and that
Mhm.
whatever you do with this bypass tool, I don't want to be responsible for your ransomware and other locker tools. I don't do that. I'm only helping you bypass the
Right.
antivirus in the EDR and the endpoint solution. We
Yeah,
sure
I am
do.
not responsible for such actions for ransomware and lockers, which is like what you kind of are. you're you're kind of I mean, like, I may not be responsible for the house getting broke into, but it didn't help that I took the deadbolts off. Like, it's you share some responsibility there, and they know that. They're just playing a little bit of CYA, obviously.
I,
But
I don't see why CIA matters on underground hacking forums, but whatever.
exactly, right? Like, you're in for a penny, in for a pound, my friend. Let's just go for it. But the Terminator client does require administrative privileges on the targeted system, and users do have to click a user account controls pop up. Those are not hard things to do. That happens all the time in attacks, right? Well, it's not like they're not hard, but it's just it's a very common
Stop
thing.
running as administrator.
Stop running.
As local,
Yeah.
Please stop running as local administrator. You don't
Stop
need it.
just clicking okay on that. I feel like we're preaching to the choir here, my friend. But what was interesting though is that a CrowdStrike engineer was talking on Reddit, and what they pointed out is that this Terminator package just drops a legitimate signed anti-malware kernel driver. So it's just dropping a legitimate anti-malware kernel driver into the folder. It gives it a random name between 4 and 10 characters. And once that's written to disk, it just loads it as a kernel level. I'm saying just as though this is like the simplest thing in the world, but it loads it as a kernel level privilege and then uses it to kill off user mode processes for AV and EDR. So, it is kind of amusing to me a little bit that, he says, hey, 300 for a single bypass, 3,000 for an all-in-one bypass. And really, it is just an all-in-one bypass, no matter which price level you pay for. So it seems to me like what you would be paying for then is Spyboy's knowledge of which processes need to be killed in order to persistently kill those AV, EDR, and XDR tools. If he knows I keep saying he because the name is Spyboy, but it's a group probably. So if they know, which specific processes you need to go after for, for a particular AV or EDR, XDR, they can target those persistence processes and then kill those off so that you don't have the AV or EDR popping back up. So it seems to me what you're paying here more is the knowledge than you are the actual tool itself.
Yeah, and so as it stands today, this malicious driver, although signed, is only being detected by a single scanning engine over at our friends at VirusTotal. And also the reality behind this is the concept of a vulnerable Windows driver, being used is not a new concept, but like you said, has to happen after escalating privileges. And so either already running as administrator or allowing or using some kind of privilege escalation from user to administrator, still triggering a UAP. And so there are still a number of things that need to kind of line up. Not necessarily, like you said, not the hardest in the world, but it's not a given. And then these kernel level drivers, at least the anti-malware ones especially, that's when you got the full system access, you have full access to everything, and you can do all of the killings, the bypasses of all the security software on that compromised machine. But again, you have to land an administrator to begin with. It's just really taking it up from administrator to system.
Yep. And if you are properly tuning and configuring and monitoring your AV and your EDR and your XDR solutions, you should hopefully be stopping it before they are able to get to that kind of access, or monitoring it and seeing that type of thing happen, so that you have the data you need to respond. But again, there's a lot of ifs in that. If your stuff is configured properly, if you have the time and budget and people and resources and stuff to manage it and monitor it consistently and constantly, like, there's a lot of if statements that go in there, and that's why things like this still happen. That's not a fault of any security team, really. Like, we're all stretched thin, but so it is very important to be aware of these things. And on that note, a few researchers, Florian Roth and Nasruddin Benchoshali, I think is how you would say that last name, if I'm just reading the English writing of it, have shared some Yara and Sigma hash and name rules that can help you detect that driver in your environment. So if you want to know more about this, if you're curious about this, bleepingcomputer.com is where we got the story. Terminator Antivirus Killer is a vulnerable Windows driver in disguise. So you can go head there and you can get the links to the Yara and the files that you would need, the info that you would need to be able to detect this.
Nice.
But I think probably time to move on to another one.
Yeah.
Just a cheeky another little story.
Yeah,
all right.
9 minutes left.
Oh yeah, all right. So let's head over to this one. This one is coming to us from the Hacker News. The article is "Beware of Ghost Sites: Silent Threat from Salesforce Communities." So I found this one and I pulled it in because it goes back to a common a common kind of refrain of like good security advice that we've talked about on this show before. But this story is basically so what happens is you can spin up these sites and communities through Salesforce for various different reasons, right? And that those sites and communities can then pull data from your Salesforce instance and from your organization, and you set up those share privileges so that it's able to grab them. And it's fairly common that these things are set up for single purposes, and then when that purpose is no longer served, they're just abandoned, it turns out, by a lot of organizations. So instead of properly, decommissioning these, removing access to the organization, they just kind of like forget that it exists and move on, which is probably, the reason that it's so common is because it's easy to do that. These kinds of things are probably being set up often by marketing or sales teams, right? They're not necessarily things that are fully on the kind of radar of an IT or security team. They might be aware of it, but not fully integrated into that process because it is just something that you're able to spin up through Salesforce. So when these get abandoned, that doesn't mean that they just stop working. Those sharing rules and profiles that you set up are still going, and that can lead to some risk for your organization.
Yeah, and so some researchers here basically going in and deep diving in there, a number of different things. For instance, as you mentioned, security profiles may be set at the time of the current configurations and the current options, but new options may roll out over time. Defaults may change, and new security features may be added and not activated or turned on. And so those are going to be a couple of things that really stand out. The other part of it too is if you start deep diving into some of the responses for these different types of these sites and communities, they also just tend to have a lot of additional context that's basically pulling from your Salesforce environment. And so by viewing, the source of the page or the headers of the page, additional kind of leaked bits are making their way out. And so, the huge lesson on this one is you set something up, you don't walk away from it. You have to terminate it when the mission is complete. I see this all the time when I was working in websites. People would install a number of different platforms, Joomla, WordPress. I mean, WordPress is still a nightmare to this day, and they would leave it unupdated. They would just build a fairly nice looking site and then never patch it, never update it, never revisit it. And then a couple years down the road, site's still operating, but there's all kinds of problems that are in the wild. And without anybody ever taking the time to go back and say, hey, maybe we should button this down, or you know what, we don't need this anymore. Then let's get rid of it. I mean, I'm pretty sure PCI also says, don't store data you don't need.
Yeah, exactly. And, Varonis was the group doing a lot of research on this one and putting out a lot of the data. And, the things that they call it specifically, you've already kind of mentioned a little bit, right? These are done with old configurations. They're done with old security settings, but they're also not being tested against new vulnerabilities that are being found. So if we have any red teamers watching, any penetration testers watching, and an organization uses Salesforce, hey, here's a great tool for you. Go see if they have any of those sites and communities set up that would allow you to grab some extra access or find a way into their system. But because this is always pulling from, new data that you're putting in Salesforce, this also poses, it's not mentioned in the article, but based on what you might have shared with that site and what you might be doing, right, this poses a risk to potentially customers that you have, right? If you are a security focused organization, or an organization that has access to other organizations' systems, so you're like an MSP or an IT provider or something, and you have something like this set up, an attacker could use this to be able to see, potentially based on what you shared with that microsite originally, what kind of customers you have and who they are, and who they might be able to target if they were able to infiltrate your organization, using that island hopping kind of technique to move from one to another. So go check your Salesforce sites and communities, folks. Go out there and take a look, see what you got. We do have some good ones.
Yeah, I was gonna say, in a twist of things, I do like this new trend of not offering doom and gloom for every little bit.
Yeah.
So I did want to share this story that I found for a little bit of good news. And we have a couple today, but the first one is about one hacking forum leaking the data of another hacking forum. In the sense that there's a new hacking forum on the internet called Exposed, and it is hacking the data of raid forums, which is actually considerably quite popular. And so somehow Exposed got a dump of raid forums data, and it is out. It is leaked, and look, it doesn't pay to do crime, kids. Listen,
doesn't pay, never pays to do crime, and there's no honor among thieves, apparently. But this is a huge boon, I think, for security researchers to be able to get some insight and demographic info potentially, and information about the types of people that we are up against regularly. And it all came to us because mom and dad are fighting. So we get ice cream, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a great little story. I love it.
But tell us about your story that you brought to us.
Yeah, another piece of good news was Splunk patched some high severity vulnerabilities that were present. Some privilege escalation issues that were there, some denial of service flaws. But what really caught my eye is they also resolved multiple severe issues in third-party packages that were being used by Splunk Enterprise. And we've been talking so much recently about SBOM and understanding everything that is inside the tools that you're using. And it sounds like Splunk is being pretty proactive in this case about understanding what tools their tool uses and what vulnerabilities are present so that they can take care of them. And that is always good news.
Yeah, and just the fact that, remember, all of your little bits have their own little bits, and all of those little bits need to be updated. So
update all the bits. All the zeros and ones need to be updated.
All the zeros and ones. But yeah, so good on you, Splunk, for going out of the way to make sure that all of the modules and components and libraries that your application is made of are also updated as part of your regular patching process.
Yep. And I want to call out, just because we say that we'll talk about people, Allison has been active in the comments here and made a comment about the last story, the overlap of Salesforce. Allison worked in marketing previously and used Salesforce there, and is now studying cybersecurity and learning pen testing. And it makes an interesting point that when it comes to the cybersecurity skills gap and shortage, do not overlook people who come from different backgrounds that aren't strictly cybersecurity. If they want to learn, they have experience with other things that they're going to bring with unique perspectives. Who knows? Allison might be the pen tester of the future, who is the person who just cracks open organizations based on bad Salesforce integrations because she used it before. She's familiar with it. Who knows? Always be looking for people.
we believe in you, Allison.
We believe in you, Allison. And we also we'll end with that high note. So thank you so much for joining us for GPS Live for the week of June 2nd. We really appreciate you being here, especially if you're watching on demand. It's not that we love you more than people who watched live. It's just very cool that you're giving us time in the week after we broadcast. So go ahead and leave some comments. We love you guys very much. Thank you for being here. Until next week, I have been and will continue to be Tristan Morris.
And I am Jonathan Singer.
And we will catch you next time. Guess who didn't have the video queued up again? All right, here we go.